public good of the order. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And just as we do for all of our speakers here, we can definitely accommodate not common thoughts, but sometimes you make us think that we are the playground people who think. All right, without further ado, I'm going to get right into it, and I do apologize for our tardiness.
Just explain the format real quick.
Thank you for keeping me on. So I took last time off, and
That's okay. That's okay.
First things first. This is how we're going to go. How things go.
Speaker
rules. Two simple rules. One full time and no personal attacks. Easy enough. All right, we're going to have our featured speaker come up when I introduce him. Then we're going to go into Q&A. And then we're going to go into rebuttal. Any deviations from that, we strongly discourage.
Restaurant closes at 7:45.
Restaurant closes at 7:45. You ask, are we doing tuition this evening?
Yes, we are.
All right, collective duration.
Yeah.
But we also ask that everyone order up the menu and take care of our wonderful servers and staff. All right, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. King. Professor Emeritus, Sociology from Purdue University Northwest. And he's going to talk about building a progressive labor movement today and where it started and where it's going to. So, Prof Scipes, please come up.
Good afternoon, everybody, whether you're here or wherever you are in the world. We're here to celebrate Labor Day. That's unusual for the United States. Usually we have it in September. But Labor Day actually began here in Chicago in 1886. And this is something we don't get taught in school. And I think it's important that we start here. And then I'm going to talk, I'll explain what I'm going to do after I get through this. Okay, in Chicago in 1886, well, actually all over the country, there was the demand for the 8-hour day. And on May 1st of 1886, there were something like 1.5 million workers across the United States that went out on strike, the 8-hour day. Before that, although it had been made legal in 1864, it had not been observed by most employers. So folks decided they had to take matters in their own hand. So what they did was that they called for strikes on that day. Like I say, 1.5 million across the U.S. came out. 750,000 were here in Chicago. It's a massive turnout. But a worker was killed outside the McCormick Reaper Works, which for those of us in Chicago, it's down on Western near Blue Island. Somewhere around there, somebody was shot. And so there was a rally that was called on May 4th to protest this killing of a worker. And it was a quiet affair.
Did we center the camera on the speaker? Thank you. Sorry, Kim. There. Thank you.
Okay. Anyway, there was a rally called for May 4th. It was a pretty quiet thing. It wasn't a large turnout, but about the mayor came and he saw it was so low key, he decided to go home early. Well, when he got down to less than 200 people, there was a police station across the street. A bunch of cops came out and marched over to harass the workers that were rallying there. And somebody, we don't know who it was to this day, threw a dynamite, about like a hand grenade, into the cops and killed a couple of cops, and they went wild and everything else. And out of that, there were a number of arrests. And eventually there were 8 men who were put on trial for killing the cops. And 4 of those were hung. So I think we ought to take a moment to remember these 8 men. George Engel, Samuel Fielding, Adolph Fisher, Louis Ling, Oscar Newby,
Yes.
Albert Parsons,
Very good.
were put on trial for the Haymarket Affair. And George Engel, Adolf Fisher, Albert Parsons, and August Speed were hung in Chicago in November of 1886. Even though some of them weren't even at
Thank you,
the
Chris.
was out of the city.
Oh.
And so these men, the four men were hanged. Eventually, one man, Louis Ling, was later found in his cell the night before the hanging. He had a dynamite bomb explode. They don't know whether he tried to kill himself or the police put it in his cell. And then three other men spent years in prison, were eventually pardoned in 1893 by Governor Algill. Now, when this happened in 1886, Samuel Gompers of the American Federation of Labor reported that to the Labor Federation in Amsterdam, which is a European federation, and he said that we should in the future celebrate May 1st as International Workers' Day. To my knowledge, almost every country in the world, except for two, celebrates Labor Day on May 1st. The two, by the way, that do not celebrate it are the United States and Canada. And what you hear, in fact, a lot of people in the United States don't know anything about this. What they say is, oh, it's a communist holiday, because we used to see on TV the parade in Moscow, and they'd show the tanks with missiles and stuff like that. Well, I was in Vietnam in 2017, and even the Vietnamese Communist Party recognized that it came from Chicago in 1886, long before the communist movement ever emerged. So I think we need to reclaim labor movement, reclaim Labor Day, and so we had a number of demonstrations across the country. Some were quite large, some were quite small, but over 3,000 events supposedly took place yesterday, where people are trying to reclaim May 1st as Labor Day, and to hell with this fraud of September. Okay, so like I say, I just wanted to mention where this came from, which is considered to be sort of the founding of the labor movement. Now, I want to shift gears and go to something else. I have a new book coming out in August, and it's called Unions, Race, and Popular Democracy, Building a Progressive Labor Movement. And I want to talk about this because this is going to lead me into my larger issue. I am very dissatisfied. I, like many others, I'm not alone by any means. I'm very dissatisfied with the state of the labor movement in the United States. It's in terrible shape, and it's been largely useless, especially in the last 40 years. And I'm going to say some things that probably going to be different than what you hear from other speakers. But to make the point, my book, and I want to use the findings of my book to build my case, so that when I get to the point and say that we need to build a new labor movement, it will follow in the logical order. So what I did in my book is that I examined the process of unionization in both the steel and meatpacking industries in Chicago from 1933 to 1955, so the CIO years. I focused on key industries, that being steel and meatpacking. Steel obviously is crucial to any industrial society, and meatpacking is for almost any society. One of the interesting things is they were major industries, and yet they both had terminus in Chicago. So steel was here in Chicago, and it went to the east, over to Pittsburgh. Meatpacking had a terminus here in Chicago, but it went to the west, out to the plains. Chicago was where they both overlapped. So what I wanted to do was try to understand how they organized, how they unionized these two industries. I wanted to see if they were same or different. What's really interesting about this case, besides both the determinants of being given, is they drew from the exact same labor pool. These were most of the workers were white ethnics from Eastern and Southern Europe, as well as African Americans from the rural South, as well as some Mexican. You had them in both industries. Okay. And yet, when you check out what they were, how their unions were developing, eventually what we find out is they took very different paths to unionization. Okay, so eventually, even though they were under the same organization, they later emerged. The packing house workers broke away from that organization and started a completely different union. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about the steel industry, industrialization in the steel industry. I'm going to give you some background on that. And then I'm going to talk about the packing house workers and how their union developed in the packing house industry. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare how they each addressed a common problem. And that common problem was white supremacy and racism. Because what we're going to find out in a minute is that while one of them, and I'm not going to say which one, confronted this white supremacy and racism, the other one ignored it. And so the question I had, and this is part of my research, is what happened? How did we get this? So I'm going to tell you this story in a way, and in doing it, I'm going to try to draw out some ramifications for building a new labor movement, a progressive labor movement today. So many people don't know this, but the largest steel mill in the world, steelworks in the world, for a while was here in Chicago. Okay. If you don't know, Chicago has two rivers, one being the Chicago River that goes through the Loop. On the far southeast side is the Calumet River. And on the banks of the Calumet River, set southwards, it was owned by U.S., what became U.S. Steel. If you come over the Calumet Bridge into Chicago, like I did today from Indiana, on the north side of the river is where this mill used to be. It's no longer there. In fact, they've demolished it, and in fact, there's some talk of building housing in there. I don't know if they've cleaned it up or not. Yeah, I hope so. But Chicago Works. Yeah, southwards. So, yeah. So anyway, what people don't realize, we know about the CIO. Most of us know at least something about the CIO. It was part of the American Federation of Labor. The American Federation of Labor was moribund. We had the Depression starting in 1929. By 32, they just really had no idea of what to do, how to think about this. They were off. The head of the coal miners union was a man named John L. Lewis. And John L. Was at a conference. John L. was arguing the old AFL had organized by crafts or occupations. So you had the carpenters union, you had the pipe fitters union, you had steam fitters union, et cetera, et cetera. So by occupation, that's also called craft unionism. And that's the way the AFL had traditionally organized. And John Lewis, to his credit, recognized that the times had changed, industry had changed, and so you had these big industries such as steel, such as meat packing, such as auto. And Lewis argued for an industrial unionism where every person in that industry was in one union. Okay, they weren't broken up into occupation groups, but in industrial unionism, if you worked in a steel mill, you're in the steelworkers union. You work in a packing house, you're in the packing house workers. Okay. Lewis was championing this against the old fuddy-duddies that were running the American Federation of Labor. And in Atlantic City in 1935 at their convention, the head of the carpenters union smarted off to Lewis. Lewis was a big man physically. He turned around and hit that Ray Hutchinson, the head of the carpenters union, in the mouth. Just knocked him on his ass both. And that is, can we hold off on this stuff until after I'm talking? This is very disruptive. Anyway, so after that, Lewis pulled together a number of union members together. They decided to form the Committee for Industrial Organization, CIO. Right? So it was a part of the old AFL system. Now, what a lot of people don't know, because they think the heaven and the moon together and everything else like that, was that before John L. not the second. A year before, the workers at Southworks created their own independent union. They had organized starting in 1934. And the key actor was a man named George A. Patterson. And Patterson was a roll turner. So his trade was to determine the width between the rolls and determine the thickness of the steel. Okay. And so he had built this independent union. He had also worked to build a union across the Chicagoland area. He, not only steel, but he had connections with people in like international parties here and other places like this. So Patterson is doing this, and this is in the deepest part of the Depression. And he's trying to build this union, and he does. And he becomes an independent union. They had their own domestic contract by November of 35. John L. had over, and already by November of the same year, these workers had already organized the union. It was built on the shop floor from the bottom up, and it was based on democracy. The Democratic Union is over the rest of 35, and starting in 1936, you have workers that are trying to build unions all across the country, but the workers did not respond to the problems of the Depression. There were a few activists here and there that were trying to get together, but the different did not organize in that way. But there were people, they were activists in Pittsburgh, in that area, that were active. And Patterson was going over there, he was meeting with them, and they all recognized that the efforts here were headed anywhere else in the steelworkers union. So anyway, Patterson's working with them, trying to build this union. And in June of 1937, I'm sorry, 1936, Lewis created the Steelworkers Organizing Committee, particularly to organize steel. And he put Bill Murray, his first vice president of the mine movement, put him in charge of SWAT, the Steelworkers Organizing Committee. And so Murray knew about Patterson's efforts here in Chicago and asked him to come to get involved. And he wanted this independent union to affiliate with SWAT. And Patterson and Murray agreed. They had a meeting, and the members agreed. And so Local 65, what they call Local 65 out of Southworks, was the very first union in the entire country to join the Steelworkers Organizing Committee. It was a big deal. It was a big deal. And so you have John L. Lewis, who had a national reputation as a progressive labor leader, And he and then SWAC joined together to try to organize the steel industry. Now, I've gone into this for a reason, and that was that Bill Murray eventually called Patterson to Pittsburgh, asking him to bring a delegation to meet with the head of U.S. Steel, and they came, and then the head of U.S. Steel would meet with them. Well, in the meantime, though, when he went back to work at Southwoods, Patterson got fired. He lost his job for his organizing, and SWAT did nothing to protect him. Normally, when your leader is attacked, you go out on strike, you shut things down. You say, we're going to put up with this shit. None of that happened. So what did happen was a guy named Van Bittner, who was his Western regional organizer for SWAT, took Patterson on his staff. But Bittner, who came out of mine workers union, as did Murray, as did Lewis, Bittner did not believe in democracy. He also was a racist. He refused to challenge the steel companies, because what the steel companies did, there was, before the unions came, the workers, the companies worked very hard to keep workers from joining unions. They were very anti-union. And what they would do, among other things, is they would split people up by ethnicity at first. So they'd keep the Lithuanians away from the Italians, and keep them away from the Greeks and stuff like that. They play them hard against each other. And then later, during the middle of World War I, when African Americans started to get in Greece, they knew that the war would start in Europe, and that
yes, I do.
And that they didn't want workers leaving Europe.
We'll see you then, okay?
Immigration almost totally stopped at that time.
Thanks.
So the steel industry was expanding. They needed workers. Where'd they go? They went to the rural South and started bringing African Americans up into this area. And that was in roughly 1916. Anyway, once they got in the steel industry, what they did was the differences between the white ethnics had kind of attenuated, it kind of broken down. And over time, we got to know each other and married and stuff like that. And so the white ethnics kind of got together, but then the bosses would play the races against each other. So they play the white ethnics off against the African Americans and against the Mexicans. They did this. So when somebody got hired, when an African American or a Mexican got hired in the steel industry, he, and I'm using that gender title purposely, was almost always confined to the hottest, most dangerous, most unhealthy department. Okay, and so that they did this to maintain control of the labor force. Very conscious corporate policy. Okay. And it was also done in the meatpacking industry, which I'll get to in a minute. And then, so what happened when the steel workers were organizing? Basically, this Van Bittner did not insist on the seniority system that they established to challenge that. So in other words, there's two types of seniority system. There's what's called department seniority, and then there's plant seniority. And the difference is if you're in a department seniority system, your seniority starts working when you enter that department. And should you leave that department, say for a better job, healthier job, you lost all your seniority and went to the bottom of the pile. Now think about this. This is in the middle 1930s, during the Depression. This is a big deal. This seniority issue. So Bittner allowed the companies to accept seniority, therefore maintaining the corporate oppression that these individual steel companies had bought. All right, so that's a little bit about the steelworkers. I'm gonna cut this down some so I can get through everything in our time. Now, what about the packing house workers? They had been organizing before the CIO as well. You had three main groups of people in that. You had white steel workers. There was been a big strike in 1922. A few of them had remained around. You had African Americans who were brought in, and the packing house companies. The key department in a packing house union is killing floors. So, in other words, when they brought that steer up into the slaughterhouse, they'd knock them out usually with a sledgehammer, and then they cut the throats, drain the blood, and put them up on like an assembly line. Only this was a disassembly line, and they would cut the steer apart, and they would send it down to the different departments. And each one, I mean, they said that they used everything but the cry. Yes. So they just cut the steer apart and distributed. So that was what was happening. But what was really interesting, and there was a third group in there, and this group has gotten a lot of terrible consideration, but they were crucial to building the packing house workers, and that was members of the Communist Party and other left-wing groups. So the communists played a crucial role in the meatpacking industry, and they also but what their crucial role was is they understood from the beginning that the union had to be built as a black and white union, built as equal from the beginning on. And so they worked on that basis. The old white activists from the 22 strike, they recognized they lost that strike because they had not overcome the racial act. And so they recognized. And when the African American workers found out that there were white workers that could take on this white supremacy and racism, they joined together. These are the folks that knew and developed eventually the packing house organizing. And what was really interesting is that when they first approached Dan Bittner, he said that he didn't have any money for them, but they could organize and say that they were, supporting the CIO. And so, but organizationally, what they did is they put the packing house workers under banded steel workers. And it didn't take people very long to recognize that Bittner didn't care a whit about white supremacy or attacking this racism. And so they decided to break off, and eventually they broke off from the Steelworkers Organization in October 1937 and formed what was called the Packing House Workers Organizing Committee. And they built this incredibly powerful rank and file union from the bottom that maintained its strength through strikes, through all kinds of turmoil. And eventually the corporations started leaving Chicago in the 50s because they couldn't break the unions. So it was a really exemplary union. And they based their seniority system on a plant seniority. So when you got hired into the plant, regardless of the job, your seniority built up in that way. And then also one of the things that they did is they made their seniority system work so that everybody had the opportunity and encouraged to apply for better jobs and stuff, better positions as they opened up. So when a job opened up, you had to go down the list who had the most seniority. They had 90 days to move into the new job and show that they could do it or they couldn't do it. If they didn't didn't do it or decided they didn't like that job, they can go back to their old position and keep their original seniority. So what this did was eventually they were able to desegregate all of the plants. And in fact, they were so powerful in Chicago that in 1953, in Montgomery, Alabama, this is 2 years before Rosa Parks made her move. 1953, the packing house workers forced Armour to desegregate his plant in Birmingham, Alabama, or Montgomery, Alabama. So this is a union that is not only taking care of its members as far as wages and working conditions, the traditional things, but also how they live, conditions they were facing in their communities. So what I did in my study here is I'm looking at both of these unions and I'm trying to understand how they operated in the workplaces they were unionized, in the unions themselves, and in the communities in which they were based. And I compared, then over time, I compared steel workers to the packing house workers. And like I said, the steel workers ignored race or white supremacy and racism. The packing house workers directly confronted it. So in 1939, as early as 1939, in racist segregated Chicago, 8 out of 14 local packing house unions were headed by African Americans in 1939. Yeah, it was pretty amazing stuff. So that and it was built on where the steel workers were always a top-down operation. You couldn't do anything without the union leaders. So packing house didn't work that way. And in fact, one of the ways they organized, they started a thing they call whistle bargaining. So if they were in a plant and say a foreman started treating somebody wrong, you'd hear whistles blow. And once the whistle blew, everybody stopped work. And then when the blew a couple of times again, then they'd start work again. And they would play off department after department. So in other words, this was the kind of unionism that was built from the bottom up. It was based on democracy. It was based on inclusion to a very great extent. And that it became so powerful, like I said, the companies could not break the backing of workers. And eventually that's why they left Chicago, is because they couldn't break the union. Okay. Now, let me take this to the next level. So you got an idea now a little bit about their history and how they organized. And what I realized as I'm studying this is I found something that's not in the literature. And in the literature, the CIO is presented as a progressive labor movement that was unified and sort of monolithic, like there was only one type of trade unionism. What I found through this work that I've been describing is no, there were two completely different conceptualizations of unionism within the CIO. So one was the top-down, limited to the factory and immediate work situation that labor historians have called business unionism. Okay. The other type of unionism that was created by the packing house workers was what we call social justice unionism. And social justice unionism was based on the workers being strong enough at work to change things and fight racism and the white supremacy in the workplace, in the union, and in the communities. So, for example, after the war, there was a Goldblatt's at 47th and Ashland that they would serve for, but they wouldn't hire them. The union made them do this. So they came into the community broader than just the plants and stuff like that, and changed things and challenged things. And it's a reputation that is very strongly known. So what you see is two different types of unionism. Business unionism, on one hand, which basically only concerns conditions for the members of that union in their workplace. They acted like leaders didn't have anything when they went back to their communities. Nothing was left. The packing house workers, on the other hand, said, no, we've got to take this stuff on. We've got to take on the white supremacy, the racism, and not only in the workplaces, but in the unions. So they had black leadership throughout the union. Also, they had a Mexican American woman down in Fort Worth who became the president of that local union. So it was more than just African Americans, it was Latinos as well. And they fought and integrated them throughout the union. And it's a stunning thing. But the long and short is you have two different types of unions. One is confined to the workplace, and we call business unionism. The other one is based in the workplace, but use that power in the workplace to improve things in the rest of the community. Okay. And so this is real interesting to figure this out. Now, like I said, one of the things about this broader vision by the packing house is there were a number of members of the Communist Party that were key actors in that. And they had this larger vision. And so we have a situation change at the end of World War II. What most people don't realize, see, when the U.S. got attacked at Pearl Harbor, just similar to how the U.S. attacked Iran, by the way, on February 28th. But when the U.S. was attacked at Pearl Harbor, the unions went to their president and offered a no strike pledge. And they didn't get much from it. They basically, I mean, that's the one power that workers have, is the power to stop work and to fight on the shop floor. And they had that. But over the war, so the war started turning for the U.S. favor. You start seeing more and more strikes, all kinds of things, sit downs, everything. And when people didn't want to work, they just didn't work. And so right after the war, the first year after the war, so we're talking roughly August of 45 to August 46, we have the largest strike wave in the U.S. history. 116 million working days were lost due to strike activity. We had national strikes in auto, and steel, and meatpacking, and electrical workers. We had strikes among the Teamsters. We had strikes among the railway workers. Tremendous upsurge, 116 million production days dropped. This scared the more conservative members of the CIO union. Now, most people who study labor know that the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, remained very conservative, although it fought the CIO, but it was always more conservative. What people don't realize is that there was a conservative wing, and most of the unions in the CIO were actually business unions with things over their belt. And after the war, now remember, this was when supposedly the communists were going to conquer the world and all this stuff, and the other research. But anyway, what you have happening is conservative business unionism leaders like Walter Reed, head of the auto workers, within the CIO, he turned against the left-led union, the social justice union. And so Luther became president of the auto workers in 1946, and up to that time, you had three strands of the CIO politically. So the steel workers were the most conservative, the auto workers were most centrist, and electrical workers were to the left. And packing house workers, by the way, were part of the left as well. What happened was Luther moved the auto workers to the right to join the steel workers, and then they too both turned on the left, and in 1949 expelled somewhere between 750,000 and 1 million workers out of the CIO. This was not this AFL, and this was the right wing of the CIO. I would argue, therefore, and that because of this, is that we have not had a labor movement in the United States since 1949. That's older than I am. I was born in 51. So that we have not had a labor movement in this country. What we've had is a trade union movement. And the difference is that a trade union movement tries to take care of its own members, where a labor movement looks for the well-being and the efforts of all working people. We have not had that since 1949. So what I'm arguing here today is that we're seeing a new upsurge among the labor movement. Started here in Chicago, surprise, with the teachers union in roughly 2009, 2010, when workers in the Chicago Teachers Union formed the coalition of rank and file executive. Huh?
Rank and file.
Yeah, thank you. They formed that. They ended up taking over the leadership of the union, and then in 2012 we had that first big teacher strike that was there. That sparks started the revival of the labor movement, and it didn't take off immediately. But what you start seeing is teachers unions around the country in some of the red states like Oklahoma and West Virginia and Arizona. They started organizing and winning. Since then, there's been a lot of other efforts to organize, Amazon, the Starbucks. There's a range of different things. You've seen a more progressive unionization in United Auto Workers, and you saw their stand-up strike in 2023, where they beat GM, Ford, and Stellantis all together. And the question is, how are we going forward? How are we going forward? And what I'm arguing to do, based on this research, in this book, literally, I could talk for hours on this. But what we'll see is when the book comes out in August, this argument's developed much deeper, and that I'm arguing basically that if the American labor movement is to survive and become again a labor movement, that we have to repudiate the business unionism that's run the labor movement since 1949. So I'm saying what we've had is the trade union movement. We used to have in the early 50s something like 35% of non-farm workers, non-agricultural workers were in unions. And today that's under 10%. And the leadership of the AFL-CIO does not have a clue of what they're doing. They're running around with their heads up their lower extremities, but put it that way. There's no way forward. And what I'm arguing is a way forward. I'm arguing that the union, we have to repudiate the business unionism exists. We have to create social justice unionism throughout our labor movement. And thus, by taking care of not only trade union members, but all working people, that we can rebuild the labor movement. One of the things that I would like to see revisited, because there's a really interesting case out of Austin, Minnesota, out of the CIO years. They created a thing they called the Union of All Workers. And what they did is they used tracking plan, in fact, to go out and support workers anywhere that they were organized, sort of a community-based organization. And they did this, and it actually traveled throughout much of the upper Midwest on the west side of the Great Lakes. So Wisconsin, you had it in Minnesota, you had it in the Dakotas, you had it even in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. So what you saw was workers that had a big base going out seeking workers that wanted to organize and helping them to do so, and therefore taking over and developing pro-union activities, but also looking out for working people in general wherever they may be found. And I'm arguing that we have to go back and try this again. If we continue with the unionism that we have today, where they don't care about nothing about their members, it's going to kill what's left of the trade union. In other words, I'm arguing that we need to get out, develop the social justice unionism movement, and expand that with community organizing to try to organize. And we won't see it completely in Chicago, but you have a lot of smaller towns and stuff where every business in the town could be organized. And we've seen it from the 30s that it works in America. And I'm going to suggest to you that that's the choice. If we want to build the labor movement, and I think it's essential, because where else, when you're a worker, when you go into that plant or that department store or whatever, you lose your constitutional rights. You can't have freedom of association. You don't have freedom of speech. If they charge you with something, you're considered guilty until proven innocent. The only way that we've been able to improve working conditions for working people is by unions. And unions that had bigger visions than just in that one workplace. Unions that fought for things like healthcare, national health care, that had things like the 8-hour day, that had work safety limitations that they had to put. Who won the union movement? The weekend. These are things that were won by the union, but it's a union movement that was willing to have a broader vision and was willing to fight. We haven't had that since 1949. It was kind of hidden until the Pacto strike in 1980 or 81 under Ronald Reagan. And since 1981, the overall labor movement, which is called the AFL-CIO, which emerged in the 50s, has been all but useless for anything except in a few particular unions. And that's not sufficient. We've got to rebuild the labor movement. And I'm suggesting by learning from what we can from the steel workers and the packing house workers in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, that there are things to learn, and that we've got to build our unions from the bottom up based on democracy, based on inclusion, and address, and I hope that the activists today have the vision that those in those earlier periods had about race. So whether it's racial issues or whether it's LGBT issues, whether it's women's issues, trans issues, whatever, if that's the issue, if that's what we need to do to bring people in, the union needs to be willing to do that, and the union needs to be willing to fight for all of us, because otherwise it's useless. All right, I'm going to stop here. If you want to have questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Scipes, for that esteemed presentation. So before we get into Q&A, I'm going to remind everybody that you can ask, your question can be as long as it needs to be, as long as there's a question in there. I'm looking at one person in particular online. So any Q&A for regards to the presentation. Okay, I'll get it to Kim and keep an eye on the online.
I will. Okay, Kim, I'd like to know, the workplace has changed quite a bit since the 40s. Used to be a production line, and then they had the office workers. Now you're seeing a blending of all that stuff together. Like with the production line, you almost have to be a computer genius to work some of these things with all the advanced robotics. Large things. Most people I know today work behind computers, or they're into some kind of people-to-people business. How would you be able to do that so-called unionization from the bottom up with the new environment that we have now? And are there specific organizations actually doing this now?
Great question, Jane. For those that maybe couldn't hear, he was asking with the changes in the workplace, particularly as we got more computers, more things like that, how can we build this kind of unions? Personally, I think it's absolutely necessary to do this. I have worked in banks. I have worked in schools and things like this. So I've done a number of jobs, And see, in many places, you still need unions. However, I can't tell you about the situation in your workplace. You have to find people within the workplace. You need to find sisters and brothers there that you work with. And if you're dissatisfied, you have to start thinking about where can we get help? Where can we get some more information, things like this. There is a network, actually North American network called Labor Notes. They have a monthly news journal, and then every other year they have a conference. And they've been having them in Chicago the last several years. They're going to have it again and again in June. And this gives people, activists, a chance to get together and speak. Now, I'm not happy with a lot of the stuff Labor Notes does, but the network is there. So people can use that as a way to connect to others. There are people out there. I think what's going to happen, I'm hoping that when my book comes out, it won't be out until August 15th, but once it comes out, that people start reading this and it'll start generating some thinking on their own. In other words, I can't save the labor movement by myself, but I'm trying to give people some ideas, some inspiration to go out and figure out how to do that. The key thing, and I'm in things, any effort to organize is building organization. And that's crucial. So even an informal organization, you get, say, 4 or 5 of your workmates together and say, I'm not happy about this, or I'm getting treated differently for promotion than other people are, whether I'm racial, or sexual, or your gender-based criteria, whatever. And if you can get people together and say, no, that's not right, we're going to work to do this, then you have a chance to build organization in your workplace. And I think that organization, by the way, is important even in workplaces that already have unions. Because a lot of times what happens is that unions bring somebody in from outside that don't know the conditions of work. You need to have people on the ground. I hope that's given you at least some idea, Ken.
It has, but the thing is, people change jobs. I'm sorry. If you want to go, we got other questioners. We have other questioners, by the way. So, but
Trying to get back to you.
that's fine. Who else has a question?
So around World War One, we stopped immigration, and then there were jobs opening up for people who migrated from the South, the African Americans.
Right.
Does that indicate that there is a conflict between open immigration and labor?
I don't think it's the combination that you're looking at. I may be wrong, so let me take a stab. The thing was that when the U.S. cut off immigration, there was basically nobody let in after 1923, any color from any part of the world. That didn't open up until 1965. So there's all but no immigration. But the thing was that the industry was growing. They needed workers. And so immigration wasn't a problem that way. We're in a different situation today where the immigration, where these industries, a lot of these industries are not going. In fact, as we've seen our steel industry and other industries go overseas, we need fewer workers. But the thing that we always did is if you were willing to work, you were welcome. Well, those things have changed. Politicians have changed that. But think about how the politicians are working. I would argue, and I'm not going to do it tonight because it'd take me a while, but I would argue that our economic system is failing. It's no longer providing the jobs that we need. And what your politicians are doing is blaming the immigrants for the problems. And it's not the immigrants that shut down the industries and moved them overseas since the late 70s. Those immigrants did not make those decisions, but yet we tried to blame it on them. So a scapegoat. So particularly those of us who used to work, used to have jobs, we blame it on the immigrant. No, it's not the immigrant, it's corporate management that's making decisions to the, you need to sort of open that up and understand those differences in the document revision. It's different, you're right, it's a different world now.
Okay, who else has a question?
Usually the question,
Go right ahead.
the current work environment.
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure if I'm like on.
Would you hand her the mic?
The workforce.
Hang on, we're gonna,
You could just start over.
yeah,
Where they can hear you.
yeah.
So, so I would like to follow up with the gentleman's discussion over there. I think the workforce in the US, 70% of the workforce in the US, it's about service job. So your finding or your study research is more about skills and manufacturing jobs, which is like a very, very small percentage of the labor, the current labor here. So how do that study will maybe infer some insight into improving the labor market, the level of service workers here, because they totally too different right now.
Manufacturing is a service.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you're talking about the shift from manufacturing employment to service employment.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It's something like 70% or so.
Yes. More.
Yeah, more or less that's right. In some conditions, I mean, you don't, one of the changes that has hurt in unionization is we used to have big plants, sometimes with 10,000, 12,000 workers in plants. Today we have much smaller plants, things like this. But a lot of the issues, although they look differently, and I'm saying this because I've had years of experience. I've worked in, like I said, banks and schools and done web publishing. And so I've done a bunch of work besides being a professor. I'm very unusual. I'm a professor with real world experience. In fact, I didn't get my Ph.D. until I was 51.
Wow.
So anyway, the point is I've been out there and a lot of the conditions are very similar. That depends on the industry. So for example, I worked for a bank downtown that was very profitable and they shared with their workers. I mean, I got one year I got a $15,000 bonus. Now for places like that, you might not need a union, at least most of the time. But most places aren't paid kind of other little bonuses, things like that. We know that. We know they don't want to increase our wages because they want to make more money for themselves and their stockholders and all this other stuff. But part of the thing is, I think we're all big boys and girls, if you will, that we go in and if the boss offers you, say, $10 for an hour, well, in Chicago it's much higher. I'm used to be in Indiana standards. $10 an hour is a big wage in Indiana right now. But say here even $20 an hour. Now you can say, well, I like that, I don't like that. But what most people are doing is they're trying to say, well, I'll go elsewhere if I don't like this job or I think I can make more money, I'm going to go elsewhere. Part of the thing is trying to get people to stand together and figure out if they like that job, they should hold on to it, but find other workers that agree with it. And the key is building the organization on the shop floor. That's the key. And that's going to be very similar. Different conditions, different issues. Still, when you get down to it, the only power workers have is that they can collectively withhold their labor. That's our one strength. That's our ace card. And the employer wants everything except for us to remember that.
I
They
think
don't want us to.
I think you ran out of power.
Oh, did you turn it on?
That's fine.
Ch Charlie, let's go with you next. Charlie?
All right, Dr. Scipes.
Yeah.
I've heard that among the modern industrialized nation that the United States has absolutely the worst labor laws. These companies, as soon as there's any indication of a union coming in, they have these law firms that come out and do nothing but stretch it out for years. And they intimidate the employees, call them in one by one into the office, intimidate them, and drag it on legally for years. What are your views regarding the structure of trying to organize a union? Is the NLRB? The NLRB doesn't do anything. Anyhow, that's all. What are your views? Candid opinion.
Okay, well, you're absolutely right. A lot of the laws that we have are, a lot of the labor laws have been where we had strong labor laws, they've been denuded. We don't have them anymore. Or if we push to get them, they're as weak as possible, et cetera, et cetera. We have to decide that we want to change that. If we're not happy, we've got to find other people that are similarly willing to work together and try to find ways to do that. Now I think a union has to be built from the workplace up. But look at the Chicago Teachers Union. They built that power from that union, and now the mayor is one of their former staff members. They used that power that they had to do that. Now, you can't do that in every case. I understand that. But I also understand that workers need to come together. If they're not happy with things at the workplace or the laws that they can't get passed, they have to decide what to do with them. Now, let's see how I can put this delicately. I don't like the Republicans. And the problem is I don't like most of the Democrats either. It's really that bad. So the question is, and this is a problem that people have to come up with and address themselves. So working with workers in workplaces. But I think one of the things, and I forgot this point, this is an important point. I want to go back for a moment. One of the things that you see today is the unions do not educate their members. They don't get people together and sit down and say what's going on, how the workplace is changing, how the conditions are changing, how the politics are changing. You used to have pro-labor Democrats that were pretty good. Now I'm hard pressed to name, almost any nation. Yeah, it's very bad, but we've got to figure out how to do this. And I think this is one of the things, if you will let me use the term, the larger left has to settle out. So for example, right now at the midterms, I would encourage people to take on the Republicans and try to take them out of office unless they've been challenging Trump. There might be 2 or 3 that get excluded. But that's something you have to talk with. You have to get together. You have to talk with your fellow workers. You have to decide what's important. You've got to take responsibility for making things better. It's not going to happen automatically, and it's not going to happen simply because you voted for this person at this time or the other. You have to build an organization. And the sense of organization can be in the workplace, but it also can be in the community. We've got to find ways out of what we're doing. This idea of sitting on our butts, doing nothing, but every 2 or 4 years we go vote, that takes 10 minutes and then we're done. That's not going to cut it. And we need to learn from those examples. And I think that's important. Thanks for raising that.
Okay. Ellen, you go next online. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this was really interesting. I guess it's very interesting that you say since 1948, things have gone downhill, and I think the same thing is true for, like, say, free speech, like George Seldes being able to write. And I agree. It's like the Republicans and are the problem. But what do you see the problem of corrupt kind of infiltration of the labor unions, even just the narrative, the history? You mentioned Walter Reuther. I saw a good documentary, and it seemed that he was killed for being a liberal. There's this kind of war on communism or liberals and pro labor politicians. And I think that the root of that is in this corrupt, it's corruption and of the legal system. And so anyhow, if you could comment on that. I don't know how to deal with that, but I would think, like, can't you get the laws back in if it was Taft-Hartley or whatever, that it was unjust the way they were subverted or something?
Yeah. Well, you've opened a whole range of things. First of all, what I would say is, yes, there is some corruption in the labor movement. I'm actually amazed how little there is. No, I'm very serious. There have been industries such as the teachers have had problems on and off, laborers have had problems, things like that. But considering the thousands and thousands of contracts that have to be negotiated and enforced and stuff like that, I think the actual corruption is quite limited. Now, where I think the corruption that you're trying to get your hands on is on the political level, is that these unions are not democratic. Most of our unions are not democratic. And I say that in the sense that they don't educate their members. I mean, I've been a member of 4 different unions. I'm a member of the National Writers Union right now. I have been for years. I was the chair of the Chicago chapter for 4 years. The unions do not educate their members. And that's one of how can you expect anybody to do anything if they're not So, for example, I know it probably even in a room like this, maybe not this room, but a lot of rooms like this, that we could have people to support, just to pick one person, Donald Trump, and others that don't support Trump. And we can, if we sat down and talked about it, I bet we could probably come to things that we say we like about Trump and we don't like about Trump. At the end of the day, you do something one way or the other, that's up to you. But if you don't educate your members, if you don't allow them to have free speech and able to talk about issues that are in their lives, or like this damn war, we went to war because Trump had an itch on his ass that was there by Bibi Netanyahu. This is disgusting. Where is the labor movement? They're not out in the streets. They're not talking about this. Oh, well, yesterday was a little with, but I'm saying in general, they have not come out against this war. They have not come out against the genocide against the Palestinians. They haven't been there to do that. And to me, what? Well, yeah, thank you. The thing is a dictator cannot operate without acquiescence. And the labor leaders in this country, in my opinion, are acquiescing.
Just to respond.
Jake, go ahead, Jake. Jake, unmute, you're online. Jake,
Jake, can you unmute?
unmute, Jake. We're ready for your question.
Okay. Hi. Okay. Yeah. Hi. Thank you for your talk. My question is this: what happens if you have a union which essentially sells out its own members? I'm thinking specifically of the time in, when was it? In the mid-1980s, I think, when the steel mills on the south side of Chicago closed down, shut down. They either moved out of the country or they moved somewhere else. I can't remember what happened, but they shut down. And there were members, and remember the national president of the Steelworkers Union was was a Chicagoan. They shut down the plants. There were members of the union who wanted to keep who had paid dues, paid dues into the union over the years. At the time that the plant shut down, these union members wanted to keep the local office of the union open. And what was the response to the union? Oh, we can't keep an office open here when we have when we don't have any more members, or when we don't have any, basically when we don't have any money coming. Is what they're implying. So the point is, these are members of the union who'd been paying into the union for years. Just right at the time when they needed the union the most, the union wasn't there for them. You hear what I'm saying?
That's
Yeah.
goofy.
But I think the bigger problem is not that the unions were shutting down and moving, although they certainly were, but because the steelworkers had never educated their members and never fought for their members, the corporations were able to get away with it. So, for example, the biggest thing was, like, for example, Bethlehem Steel. Workers lost 90% of their pensions. This is insane. They should have shut that whole industry down, because the industry is still there. In fact, we have the only 4 integrated steel mills in the country. Integration, I'm not talking about race here.
Indiana's the capital of steels.
Yeah, yeah. And it still is. But the problem is that because the steel workers have never treated their members with respect and educated them, and that they were not prepared when the collapse of the industry happened. And it happened early in the 70s. And it went on. So, yeah, I mean, part of the thing is that we members in a lot of these unions have allowed this to continue. We have not organized. Sometimes we have to organize against our own union leaders because they're not doing right. And so you've got to fight them, because if you don't, what are they going to do when there's at least a bit of pressure against them? They collapse, and then they're useless.
All right, got one question over here.
I have a question.
All right, well, hold on, we got a few.
I wonder if it was effective at all. You think that we were there saying, okay, no working, no buying, and no something else.
No shopping or no
Shopping, no,
Something.
and something else. And then we had signs covering a lot of the issues that you're talking about, that we're getting together for that. And do you see it as being effective at all?
Basically, this is the fall, No King's Day.
Yeah.
Part of the thing, first of all, I think the No King's Day March in general have been very successful. We've gotten millions of Americans out. Now, when they expanded to take on May Day, though, that was done by 1 or 2 people, and it was not given time to build up or anything like that. So it could have been much. But notice one thing: it's not there. The unions weren't there. You might have some activists. But show me one union that mobilized their membership so they came out and joined us. And I don't think, maybe in a couple of places, maybe in the Bay Area, maybe in New York, you might be able to find one, but I doubt it even there. But I know, I live in Michigan City, Indiana. We have several unions in town. Not a single one. Hell, the leadership didn't even show up. You hardly even saw union T-shirts yesterday. So I think the idea of the No King's Marches is good. I think we can build on that, but we have to build an infrastructure. Right now, they're trying to build a movement without an infrastructure. Right. And one of the things that I think those of us from the 60s generation did wrong is that we, in teaching our children or grandchildren or whatever about the 60s, one of the things and they know a lot about this, they really do. They know about the civil rights movement, they knew about the women's movement, the gay and lesbian, they know this stuff. But one of the things we have not taught them is they don't know that there were organizations at the heart of those movements. And without organization, you have no foundation. And I think what we have to do over time is build these organizations, whether in the workplace, in the community, wherever people get together and say, you know, what can we do? What do we want to do? What are the issues we're facing? Whatever, and things like that. We've got to build organization, and that's not being addressed in any significant way that I think.
Okay, there was a question from the audience here. Go ahead.
I was not at Tuesday yesterday, but I know that in City Hall, Chicago, Sean Fain,
yeah,
the UAW president, was there. The Communist Party USA was there. So they were not at Wayne Park. They were at, so they had their own separate, what do you call it? Protest. But actually, my question is that, what about science, the hating science, you know, global warming is a hoax, a Chinese hoax, you know, carbon dioxide is fine, Exxon says it's fine. What about that?
Thank you for that question. So he was asking about what are these issues that we're not getting information on, particularly around climate change and things like this. I have been teaching at the university since 2006 about climate change. It's a real thing. It needs to be discussed, et cetera, et cetera. But you've got to set up your education for that. You've got to invite people. What I found, I've also done research on the media, and what I find is the media you choose will give you a totally different view of the world. So if you watch CNN, you will see a different world than you are with Fox, or if you are with MS Now. They're totally different worlds. And they all act like theirs is the only way to see the world. But they're looking at things differently. And most of us don't understand them. And it's crucial. But and I try to do, I'm not trying to blow my own horn, but I do get out. I do speak to groups. I try to whenever I can. I even spoke to Model A Remodelers Club about climate change. And yeah, that was pretty much. Has a union invited me out? No, because they don't want to have education for their people. They're so worried. Oh my God, it's terrible. Well, that's how you work. I mean, when I go out and speak, I didn't do it tonight, but I speak over. I have a friend, former students now teaching over at IU Tech in Valparaiso, Indiana. And I go out to these college students. I have no idea their politics or whatever. And I just tell them, don't believe a single word I say. And I tell them, what I want you to do is think critically about it. If you hear something you disagree with, get your hand up. Or let's talk. Or go research stuff. I'll give you my source. Go out and figure out if it makes sense to you. And what I find is that I walk out of almost every class, kids are blown away because they've never been treated with respect in that same way. And that they're, that they have to, God, I just because he has a Ph.D. and a pretty face, I don't have to believe him, that he wants me to question him. And I'm very serious about this. I want them to question me, not just accept what I say, even though I do my best to give them the most accurate information I can. But this is a process we've got to, that we don't have education opportunities in our unions, or our community groups or our PTAs or wherever. This is insane, folks, because this then leaves people solely to the desires of, like I say, Fox, MSNBC, and Fox, MSN now, CNN, stuff like that. So I think your idea, I mean, the idea, we should be talking about climate change. I totally agree. But like I say, has a union even called me up, say, are you available? Would you like to do? No, nobody's called me. And I've been to 3 damn accessible. It's not like I'm hiding. But we've got to get back to this and not accept just the lowest common denominator politics. We have issues in this country, big issues. I mean, besides climate change, of course, we've got the war, we've got the economic situation, our economy's falling apart. We've got this whole issue of affordability that the Dems are trying to drop into, but they're responsible for a lot of that too. But we need to be able to talk about that. And we need to say, is this a major problem or is it a minor problem? And can we address it or something like that? And we're not doing it. Yes.
My question is whether unions should handle pensions, or is it true that if you do have a defined benefit pension, that it's eventually going to just get robbed or taken away?
Well, the question, in case people didn't hear that, was should unions handle pensions, or is a defined pension going to get just stolen away or whatever? Look, you'd have to look at each union, I guess. I've never been real involved in the union finances, to be honest. But I know that to lose a defined pension, go to a 401k is a ripoff. And this has happened to millions and millions of workers, and the unions have gone along with it. So, for example, right now I'm retired, and what I have in my pension is dependent on the stock market. The stock market does well, I do well. Versus now, what are they doing when they're doing well? They're screwing workers. That's how you make money. You screw workers. And there's not a billionaire in the world, other than a few athletes, perhaps, and maybe singers like Beyonce and Taylor Swift that hit the real big time. They got their money because they screwed workers. It's that simple. I think we're going to do away with billionaire.
We have a question online with Charlie again. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yes, Dr. Scipes. We have a guy at the other college, a satellite campus, who keeps saying the way to get rid of Trump is to educate the voters. And then I go to a meeting of the Greens, and they say we have to educate everybody about climate change. Now, I'm all for continuing adult education, but I'm reluctant when I hear education as a solution to a social problem. What do you think I'm supposed to do, gathering the bargaining unit and give them classes every month on social issues? That's not really their inherent function. I'm sorry. Education is. It sounds like a solution, but what it precisely? I'm supposed to. The failure of my was to educate the bargaining unit on social issues. I'm not precisely certain about this. Please expand on that.
Well, I couldn't follow everything you said there, Charlie. But the idea, what I'm talking about educating, you don't have to take a college course or anything like that. I'm not talking about that. But you could have a group of workers, whether they work together in the same business or plant or whatever like that, say, let's sit down and talk and let's get somebody in that knows something about it and let's spend a couple hours. No. You don't need, I can't give you a 30-second answer on anything. I'll guarantee you that. Give me 30 minutes, I can change the world. I can change the world.
But companies don't let people like get educated.
I'm sorry?
Companies don't let people.
why can't workers go out and, we don't do it near as much as we used to, but people used to go out to bars and have a couple of beers. You can get together with people and pull it together. You don't have to depend on your employer. In fact, you're a fool if you do depend on your employer. If you want to know what's going on. And then you have to make some choices and stuff like that, but talk among yourselves. And if this group doesn't want to do it, maybe another does. I don't know.
Okay. Well, actually, we'll get you next, first.
You were keeping busy, Travis.
He is.
Okay, first of all, what are we supposed to educate people about? I mean, basically, it's just money, benefits,
Conditions of employment.
Time, Charlie.
which is maybe, I mean, it's pretty cut and dry, and when it's time to strike, everybody knows what it's about. So I don't know what you're talking about with the education. And then second of all, I want you to comment. This has been tough for unions the last 20, 30 years. We've been offshoring expensive jobs. The corporations are pretty smart. They don't want expensive workers. They've been offshoring. They've been downsizing. They've been mechanization, stuff like that. And I think the big unions are all about services, teachers, service employee unions, Teamsters, those are all services. So, it's just, what do you think about that? About how difficult that is?
Okay. I think you're raising important questions. I go about it a little differently. Okay. Part of the thing is, first of all, we're human beings. I think that's one thing we have in common. We all eat, we drink, we sleep, we have sex, hopefully, things like that.
Doctor said so.
Anyway, the point is, what do we want from our society? We have basically, in the 30s and 40s, when workers built the CIO, they were involved in their communities. Should we have these artificial intelligence, these data centers? These are things that are happening in our society today. And because we're not organized, and because we don't talk about this, how can we do anything? I mean, you may like them, she may hate them, she may not be sure what's happening, things like that. The thing we've got to do is, and I was reading something recently where somebody dated the change to about 2007 when the iPhone came out and the individualism that generated it. And I think a lot of that's true. However, that doesn't mean we can't put the damn phones down. We can't get together and talk to people, but we've got to do it. And if we don't do it, others are going to do it to us. What's the saying? If you ain't on the, you're on the menu. If you're not on the menu, you're on the plate or something like that. Yeah, and that's basically what's that. We're allowed through our acquiescence, through our not caring, through losing trust in our leadership and stuff. We're allowing ourselves to be put on that plate and carved up pretty bad, and it's happening. And I can take you through some of the stuff.
Okay. We got two more questions left, and we're going to rebuttals.
I wanted to say that.
Quiet.
To say that for the problems, I think one of the problems is many times it's misinformation. Like companies will misinform for their employees, and unions also take ways on being transparent with members. For instance, if you take Amazon, right? For the past, I think, 2 or 3 years, there's some part of Amazon, I think like a New York City or New York State, they wanted to create a union, but there was a problem because there was a fracture between actually employees.
Hair salon up in Evanston, 17. I don't know the name of it.
Some research, there were like some research that came out that actually the company Amazon was paying some PR people to discourage some of the employees. So it puts employees against each other. So that's why I think the Colorado one, the Amazon, some states decline actually the union formation. And then other one of the states, I'm not sure if it was here or New York, eventually they got to organize the union. So one thing, I think that's one of the main problems. Misinformation and bad PR and just putting employees against each other.
Okay, just to make certain I'm getting the spirit of your question here. How do unions react to that when people are trying to organize their PR campaigns to dispel?
Thank you. Okay. I think one of the things is the union should be prepared for this. You cannot organize without having a very detailed battle plan, including, plan A, plan B, plan C, etc. It's the companies, Amazon's a good one because they just had one plant, I think in Maryland, that was unionized and they shut it down. Yeah. And that's illegal as hell, but it'll take years at best to get that settled. Part of the thing is corporations are not our friends. They're not around to provide work for us, to improve our standard of living, or anything else like that. They're here to make a profit, and they're here to take that profit away from you and give it to whatever they think, regardless of whether it's good or bad. But we have to get. Part of the thing is like we haven't been taught in school. Why aren't we taught labor studies in school? Let me ask you this: how many people have been to the Haymarket Monument here in Chicago? Yeah, well, fine about it. But you need to get your brother. All right. We have a former union member who's the mayor of this city, and there today is still no sign on that freeway that's directing people to the Haymarket. There is no sign. Well, yeah, there is a monument there. I'm not sure it's good. I have a lot of problems with it. There is, but it's down on if you're taking the Kennedy or Dan Ryan, I guess it is by then. You get off at Randolph and go west and go down to Des Plaines. Forest Park. No, that's a different thing. You go down Randolph to Des Plaines. It's about 6 blocks or so. Take a right towards Lake Street. So you're going north. It's on the right-hand side of the street. Now, the problem I have with the monument is that when the Illinois Labor Society finally got that put in 2008, after the original event was in 1886, they had to get the Central Labor Council's agreement. They had to run it by the police union. So instead of getting something that shows exactly what happened, you have this very abstract thing. It's of a wagon blowing up, and this is supposed to be denigrating free speech, something like that. That's bogus in my opinion. But yet you still find workers from around the world that come and bring plaques. Look at the plaques. There's plaques from Mexico. There's plaques from the Philippines. There's plaques in Arabic. Workers around the world know about Chicago, and yet we don't even teach about the Haymarket or about the monument in our own schools in Chicago.
175 North Des Plaines.
Okay, thank you. 175
East of the dam line.
Yeah.
East of the dam line.
No, it's west of the dam line.
Okay, well, anyway, we got 3 more questions.
We got a question online. Ellen Corley.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. I guess one question is, you talk about the challenges of this movement, and I like your insight about the social justice is one direction that needs to develop. It's interesting. Charlie had the Wobblies come in one year, and I joined them, but since they were just focusing on service companies, it really didn't have a strong enough group. But what's interesting to me, the challenge I think is what you said. Management corporations are not for labor. They are opposed to the cost of labor, and they're. I don't know how we could. It seems like in the trend in the Supreme Court and the Republicans is to give corporations more power, um, unlimited, and that's led to this authoritarian management bias and things. And so, but I have one question. I maybe Charlie knows this is that I thought I heard that the federal unions are not allowed to kind of petition. I met a federal employee that said they weren't allowed to march for anything.
All right,
Is there
Ellen,
a
can we get
block
to the
to that?
question, please?
Okay, so I'm just saying, what are these kind of structural issues, balance challenges to social justice and the ability of individuals, like teachers can organize, but
Yeah, Ellen, we got to get to the question,
what
please.
other groups? Yeah, why? How can we limit the power of the management?
Well, we do it by organizing. I mean, how did people do it in the 1930s? There were something. So, for example, there were something like 40,000 labor spies in this country that were reporting to corporations.
And
We had it, that people could organize in the 30s and 40s. It is really an incredible achievement. And I think folks are going to be pretty amazed when you see some of the stuff I found in my research that I try to bring out. This was not an easy thing, but it was people like George Patterson in the steel industry, Herb March in the packing house industry, that decided I'm going to get together with some people and we're going to organize this damn industry. And they did. They didn't go around moaning, even though the Supreme Court was worse than they are today. They didn't. I mean, corporate power was amazing. U.S. Steel alone had something like 160 different plants across the country. Much bigger problems than we had. And on top of that, then you get into the later 40s and 50s, you had the whole issue of communism and how those lies were set up. And I'm not saying all communists were good. Some were really good, some were really bad, and everything in between, just like any other group. But they contributed in some of the issues in ways that made it possible to win. So, for example, the Flint sit-down strike in December 1936 to February of 1937, there were communists there. They were essential to winning that particular battle. So we've got to, in other words, we've got to quit finding excuses. Yes, the world's tough. Now that we've got that established, what are we going to do about it? And I think we've got to take that and we know people are unhappy and we need to start trying to find ways of people that we know that we can talk to and that we can ask if it's further what doing.
Okay, Dan, go ahead.
So as far as education, what is this group? This group right here today. This is education.
College question.
Yeah, college. So this is education for strategy.
Okay,
for people.
what's the question, Dan?
It's a disorganized school. So why have it? Why?
Please get to the question to the speaker, please.
Okay, why? So we have it because we want it. We want to be educated, and we don't have a lot of money
Okay,
to go to DePaul or University of Illinois, Chicago, or University of Chicago. So we come to this place and we hope to learn something. Another thing, slaves were not allowed to be taught in 1830, 40, 18.
Okay, Dan, this sounds more like a rebuttal than a question.
A rebuttal than a question.
Can you answer why white people can have this, but certain groups in America cannot?
Well, I think one of the things I don't think anyone prohibited from getting together in a group. Those days fortunately are past, but we've got, I mean, I think this is a good example, and thank you for bringing it up. That this college and complex has been built for 75 years. I'm impressive. I mean, and I'm sure the quality ebbs and flows and everything else like that, but that people care enough that you all came down. Hopefully we got some people online. I know a few are online, but I also hope, for example, if you like this talk, once they get it taped, so then we can send it out to your friends and say, I heard this crazy guy talk the other day about unions. What do you think? You know, you can do something on them. You're not just passive. You're not just coming here just to be educated on that one thing. But it's important. I tell my students all the time, you're privileged enough to come to my classroom. But that also means you're privileged enough to share it with your friends. And we don't think like that. We don't think, if there's an announcement for I see you, brother, just say.
No, we got one more question and we're going to rebuttals.
Okay, but the thing is that.
No, we're going to rebuttals after his one more question. So
It's hard to think when I'm getting.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Anyway, the point I'm trying to say is that we've got to think about how we can take, if we hear something or we know something going on that might be of interest, to spread the word. We can talk to friends. If you're used to hearing pretty good speakers at this college and complexes, and you hear somebody's coming back that you might have heard before, or might have a subject of interest, bring your friends. So anyway, I'll shut up and let them.
Okay, this is our last question.
I'm going to make the last question. Hopefully you can understand that I've been gracious enough to make certain that the room has not.
Right. No more, Lana, no more. We're going to rebuttals.
We have to stay on program.
We're about 20 minutes over anyway.
So my question to you, Dr. Tanj, is you mentioned the Chicago Teachers Union and their political activity. Don't you think that might be a detriment to the labor unions? Because they're not just talking about labor rights anymore. Now they're trying to influence the public overall.
Okay.
Save the bench for last. That's a good question. Here's the thing. Workers should not be, and I argue are not, but they should not be separated from their community. And that workers should be able to join together to figure out things. And if they get together, if they engage in political activity, and it's done consensually, it's not just done behind their backs or whatever like that, I think the union should be involved. I'm delighted that the CEU got involved in politics. Now, understand, I'm also saying they can't, the fear of them getting involved in politics and pulling out from the schools. They shouldn't do that. They have to maintain their base. And I think any union has to do that. But if they can address larger issues, if they do it democratically, then I'm all for it. Because the corporations are doing it, and they're not doing it democratically, and they're throwing millions and millions of bucks at these elections and stuff like that. I mean, right now, for example, according to the New York Times, the Republican Party has $600 million for the midterm. Think about that. The Supreme Court has allowed these corporations to spend money like crazy. So the sailors, it's insane. We've got to find ways to fight back.
Okay.
Thank you very much for
not
only your presentation, but the insightful answers. And thank you for answering my question. Okay, we're going to get into rebuttals now. We need to get a show of hands. How many rebuttals do we have? Okay, we got one here. We got any online?
Not yet, but no, I'm sorry, we got two online, Ellen and Charlie. There's me, and then there's Mike. Anybody else? All right. Well, we'll go to about 4 minutes apiece.
So for those online, I'm gonna stand up here while you speak. And I'll give you finger cues to let you know when your time is how much time you have left. What we're doing, we'll start with Mike here.
Okay, Mike. Yes, Charlie, I see your hand. Yes, Helen, I see your hand. Okay, go ahead.
Way back when I was an undergrad. And a Presbyterian college in Plain. It's looked like diamonds into the landscape. Yeah. Economic and finance degrees that I finally ended up. So I know economic and finance pretty well. It's gonna be a stockbroker. It will be gone. Anyway, there was a class in economics called labor economics. And I was like shocked. I'm like, why is it labor economics a class? 4 credit hour class. And it was like a 200, it wasn't 101 or 201, it was like 301. I had a friend take the class and he was fascinated. He was kind of a labor guy. I was a labor, I was a teamster. So, I think the problem here is that, like I said in the question, that the labor union, the unions have a challenge, have had a long challenge. I mean, I've had 2 jobs that have been offshore. And then working in the manufacturer. And so my job is in China, 1 job's in China, and 1 job's in Japan, with satellites. So businesses can react really well, whereas the union is kind of a slow moving machine. And the corporations in America who are very sneaky and sly will be able to outsmart unions, and they look for cheap labor. So they haven't figured out a way to get at the SEIUs of the world.
2 minutes remaining.
And you know, I appreciate the father was being for pretty good bank and good decent benefits. And so they do a lot of good things. But I don't know what you're getting at with organizing and education. It's based mostly what unions are about, wages and benefits. Maybe a few other things, vacation times. American corporations are always good people when it comes to vacation times. I in the past have been always ask for at least a few weeks. You want the level of Europeans. I remember when I was went to college. You get 1 week vacation after your first year of work, bitch. And I'm like, oh, okay, it sounds good. Corporations, guys, you know.
1 minute remaining.
Try to fill this last minute with something educating. Dan, Lincoln and Jill. Good. You are correct. The Haymarket Martyrs Monument is in Forest Park, Illinois, out there on the damn Eisenhower by Oak Park.
So what's on display?
30 seconds remaining.
That is the Haymarket Memorial.
Oh, that's with the police. It's close to the police department. It's close to the police department, fire department.
It's in like a square. It's in like a town square. You can tell where that was a Haymarket.
10 seconds.
How much time do we got left?
You got 6 seconds.
6 seconds.
Yes.
5, 4.
Time is up.
All right, Dan. It's okay.
Hold on.
There's a Haymarket.
Okay, hold on, Dan. We're not quite ready for you yet. We're gonna get Charlie. But okay, Dan.
All right.
Hold on,
All
1
right.
second, Dan. We're doing Charlie first.
All right. I'd like to thank Dr. Scipes and wish everyone a happy May Day. I will cover four things. Number one, the organizing atmosphere changed with Ronald Reagan in 1970 and the air traffic controllers. And then he began the period of striker replacement. Also, the thing that changed are the treaties. When rather than deal with the union, companies can shut down and move to the Orient or to Mexico. It's this impediment to organizing a workforce very strongly. Number two, I suggest everyone look at the provisions of the Employee Free Choice Act. We need to redo the labor laws of the United States and level the playing field. The Employee Free Choice Act. Why? Number three, as an indication, do you realize it took 8 years to organize a union in the movie that featured Norma Ray, meaning the union was not taking in any dues and had to finance an organizing effort for 8 years. That's what you have to do today. That's typical. That's not unusual. Number four, I just wanted to everyone should note that on March 27th of 2025, the President of the United States abolished unions in the federal government by simply issuing an executive order. We're looking to get those restored, get rid of this guy. And number five, I'm sorry, I actually heard that the company closed, tore down the factory, and all the employees moved or got jobs elsewhere. And then I heard here at the college that the union was supposed to keep their office open. For what particular utilitarian reason would you need a union office if there is no factory, no employees, and no union? And you're supposed to keep offices, so that's what I mean. What in the world are you up against? And we're supposed to educate people that think we're supposed to keep offices, union offices open when there's no members. Anyhow, thanks a lot, Dr. Scipes. I hope your book sells pretty good and you are able to educate the workforce like you did tonight. Thank you, sir.
Okay, who's next?
We got Mike and Charlie out of the way. You want Tom? And then,
Yes.
all right, Tom,
Reagan got a nice kid there. Who you say?
you're up.
Dan. Dan, you're up. We'll go with you next after him, Ellen. Okay, Dan, you're up.
Thank you, Dr. Scipes. Union. So union in the 30s, 40s, 50s were a lot of communists. And a lot of Jews were in the union, were communists. Maybe half of the Communist Party was Jewish. And what happened to these Jews? They became conservative. They became Republicans after the 60s. And why did they do that? I don't know. I'm not sure. But they did. And so what am I saying? What am I trying to point out? I'm just pointing out that things change in America. There's also a backlash against science. What does that mean? Read.
Got 3 minutes left.
Oh, okay, thank you. Science, climate change, the Exxon global warming. The scientists wrote about it in the 60s and 70s. And what did Exxon do? They hid it. They hid the science because they didn't want to deal with it. They wanted to make money. And so today, what are they doing in Iran? They're making a lot of money. And what do they care about? global warming, about higher CO2 in the atmosphere. They don't care. So corporations are acting like criminals. And in America, they get away with murder. But we have to fight them, no matter how small we are against big billion-dollar corporations. So as far as education, the College of Complexes tries to educate people, and they seriously try. And some people make fun of it, some people make it a joke, but I think it can be serious. People can learn things here and share things. I have something to share. My union in the library had no benefits for part-time people because they gave part-time people 18 hours a week to work, and the union contract said people have to work 20 hours a week. So they're just playing games. Another thing, when we were negotiating the contract with the city of Gary, Indiana, all the people on the negotiating committee became department heads, which meant that they were not part of the union anymore. So this is a tactic by management to eviscerate the union. All the leaders on the union were made department heads. And this is what happens in America. But we got to fight it. Fight the power.
Okay, Ellen, you're next. Go ahead. Ellen, you're next. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this was a very good talk. Thank you. I, as this group, a lot of people know, I come from I call myself adult child of a Republican family, and that I was just raised, my stepfather was head of research at Oppenheimer, was managed Ayn Rand's books, was, a Milton Friedman and Alan Greenspan devotee. And so I was really kind of educated to think, management, the owners have the power. And, that'll be good for all of us. And as I grew up, I came to see the other side of the coin, that I was actually in a market researcher, consumer research, employee research, people, opinion research, and, and then just looking at things sociologically, you can see that the problem is that the deck is stacked toward management and oligarchs, and basically a fascist, a capitalist kind of fascist system, and that controls the media, public relations, has replaced real journalism because they own the media channels, the CNN, the Fox News, all the cable, and they control the social media. So, with censorship and really abuse of power over the education and the public, public interest issues. Actually, the Federal Communication Commission is supposed to monitor the media, so it reflects as if the media belongs to the people, not the corporation, the owner, the managers. But William Casey, the CEO, who actually worked with my stepfather to start the Manhattan Institute think tank, and all these other think tanks have the deliberate strategy of free enterprise, no, just misinforming, miseducating the public. Actually, William Casey was said by Barbara, I forget her name, at the beginning of 1981, Reagan's term, that if his plan worked out, which it did, people will be completely misinformed because they could control the news with, they captured the promised software and using AI, basically we're able to bring about a total information awareness, total spectrum domination of the news, the media. And that really, that idea of doing that started in 1945, at the end of World War II. Reinhard Gehlen worked with Allen Dulles to form the CIA and the BND, and to basically use the Cold War to bring about, that was World War III, where we are now, World War IV, the Fourth Reich, which is a covert, totalitarian empire, and without knowledge or designed for the oligarchs. Have I run over time? I'm not watching. Yeah.
Time's up, Ellen.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Now, all right, Jake, could you raise your hand up? Go ahead, Jake. I'll be short on mine. Jake, go ahead. You're up.
Jake, if you can hear us, you're.
Jake, you're up. Jake going once. Jake going twice. Jake, we're gonna
Go on without.
all right. Do you have any rebuttal you want to make?
We're gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna give the closing arguments and we'll.
Okay, that's fine. And all right, Jake's muted. What was coming to me tonight was something that's kind of dastardly in one way. We're saying that people can't educate themselves. And why is it we got all of the wisdom of the human beings in the power of an iPhone? You know what it is? Plato warned us in the Republic that people could mistake shadows for reality. He imagined a cave. We built that cave and put screens in it. Today, every piece of human knowledge sits in our pocket, and yet people don't educate themselves. Question is why? We scroll instead of study. We react instead of think. We've confused exposure with education. They retreat into echo chambers, into comfort, into certainty without understanding. And as Aristotle said, an educated mind can entertain a thought without accepting it. And in a world driven by outrage and distraction, ignorance just as common is rewarded. AKA, let's look at Trump, for example. But here's the danger. A society that refuses to think becomes easy to control. And that's exactly what we've seen a lot of times with the Republican Party tonight. Benjamin Franklin said, a republic, if you can keep it, you don't keep it with noise. You don't keep it with ignorance. You keep it with people willing to do the work. The tools are in your hands. The question is, are we willing to use it to educate ourselves? Thank you.
Oh, such drama. Oh, profound.
All right, thank you, everyone. Essentially, our guest speaker, Dr. Scipes. Before we close out, I'm going to give you an opportunity to give a closing argument.
Yes. Okay, Jake, you had your chance already with the thing. We are closing out the rebuttals now.
First of all, I want to thank all of you that came out. You thought about what we were saying, who had questions or whatever. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I think one of the things that I would like to encourage you more, because talk even a couple of hours is not enough to get complex ideas really thought out and engaged with. My book will be out in August. If you look at the advertisements for tonight's talk, there's a code to pre-order the book and to get it for 30% off. I would encourage you to get it and read it and tell other people about it. See if it makes sense. But there's nobody I know what's out there writing like this. I'm raising some stuff. I'm looking at things from different issues, different angles, looking at things differently than what's normally been thought of. I would encourage you, to get a copy when it comes out. Think about it, and if you want, I can come back to town and we can argue about it. But I think it's worth your time. I think it's worth your money, and and that code will save you 30%. So it's not all bad. That's what it is. Yeah, really. So I thank you and appreciate you for your folks online. Thank you as well. And I'll see you whenever you need me.
I want to do a quick plug of his book by showing a screenshot of his book on our Zoom thing, just so you guys can get the quick link in here. It won't take but a second to do. But
the cover hasn't been issued.
Tim is putting it up on the, put the link right up on the Zoom page.
and you can see it now. There's his book. It's $34.94, 95, 30% off. And it's by Unions, Race, and Popular Democracy, Building a Progressive Labor Movement by Prof Scipes. He's giving 30% off his book. And I just thought all you guys would like to see that.
All right, well, thanks for that, Tim. And before we call it a night, I want to remind everybody, we will be back here May 16th, where the topic will be unified AI imperative. One institution to save humanity, and why U.S. and China integration is our only hope for surviving transformative AI. It's a very delightful discussion. I would say, to hear all this. Further ado, we are now adjourned, and we thank you all very much.
Thank you all very much for coming.